Hello YouTube, it's Mr. Blandis. Welcome back to my channel. This is a channel where I write fantasy and I bring it into the physical realm. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful day. But the reason it looks like I'm sitting in candlelight is because if I were to turn on the lights above me, then it would cause a really bad glare. So that's why I try to film my stuff during the day. I got a little candle here. Well, it's not really a candle, but it's a lantern that has a flickering light on it. It's more for mood, ambiance, we would say. But yeah, today I'm going to try to quickly go through my books and so forth. That way you have a better sense of what I write. Now I'll kind of give you a history of where I went, where I came from, all that stuff. To start off, many know this already, but for those who don't know and who are new to my channel, I write fantasy, and I started back when I was in high school, which was back in 1998. Which really kind of dates me a little bit, but it's okay. So I started writing this concept of a fantasy world, and it was only just emboldened a little more when I was reading the Tolkien books, the Lost Tales, and the Children of Hurin, and the Hobbit, and all that stuff. That kind of just piqued my interest even more. And at that time, I was deeply into Greek and Roman and all the ancient type of civilizations. I was really into reading about those. And of course I was playing Age of Empires. You guys want to look that up? Go ahead and look it up. My first book was Legends of Aelin. This is actually hardcover, excuse me. I drew that cover. I kind of wanted to give it the idea that it's a Corinthian type of helmet. So I drew some runes on it, and on the brim or the noses I have the word Slada on there to represent the city-state Slada. And so I wrote this book, and it wasn't as thick. It was quite thinner, much thinner. But since then I kind of fleshed out a lot more of the world, that is. I even got as far as making a 3-foot by 3-foot map of the world. I even made the frame and everything that map is on. I'll put a picture of that not in the notes, but in the community, so you guys see that. But the story, this book actually, it sets up the scene, what's going on. You first are introduced to a gentleman by the name of Ivar. And Ivar is a troubled warrior who has PTSD with combat and things he's done, the people he's lost. He has a friend who is a half-elf. His name is Dracu. Dracu is a prince of 2 kingdoms, and he ends up going back to, in this book, he goes on a journey to find himself and what he actually wants. And in the process, he comes across the younger version of Ivar, because the first part, a couple chapters are explaining who Ivar is, and then Ivar kind of goes to his desk and he begins to write what he knows of the histories and the backstory of Dracu and his father, Strone. And Strone has a couple of friends and generals that he follows. Strone comes from a human village that was destroyed by bandits, and the last king of Meldoria, who was an elven lord, took him in and adopted him because his wife was poisoned and she wasn't able to bear children. So they took this baby in and raised it, and they gave it the education of elven law and so forth. So he eventually became king and earned the respect of the elves, but in a war with the trolls, he was killed. So Dracu comes into the picture because the woman that Strone married fled the kingdom because it was in turmoil, and she went back to her father's kingdom where Dracu was born. So the story goes on to where Dracu grows up, and at age 40 he decides that he wants to find out more about his lineage and where he comes from, but he doesn't want to be a king of any country. He doesn't want that status, and ends up going on an adventure, and during this adventure he meets Ivar, the young version of Ivar. At that point, Ivar was a brutal assassin, and along with Ivar came a dark elf named Elfie, and Elfie was inseparable from Ivar. But they go on. They actually end up at the end of the book, they save some people. They save a couple of main characters that are pertinent to the story later on. Ivar gets entangled with the Red Horde, which is the main enemy in this book, and he has his own objective, his own motives of what he wants to do. So he kind of like neglects his little friendship he created and goes after a particular target he wants to get rid of. Party gets split up towards the end of the book. Dracu ends up in his father's kingdom, where he has to come to grasp what he wants to do, which he does. So I am working on book 2 for this one. It's almost complete. It's about 85% done. This was my first baby that I created. Legends of Alien was the first one. So after I published that book, I published it the first time with Author House. I paid $900 to get it published. Don't do that. Don't go with the Vanity Fair where you have to pay them. Do not do that. It's a waste of money. It's better off going with Amazon where it's free. ISBNs are free. Uploads are free. You can change files for free. Anyway, that's a different subject. So I decided that I wanted to continue on with the stories, and I created a little booklet called Heroes of Aeolin. So these heroes will eventually become part of the main story later on, but they go about and they get all rounded up by a mysterious black figure breathed in smoke. So he goes around at the bidding of someone else and gathers up these heroes to put them in a spot where they come into the story later on. But it will be associated with this one. So, not all the heroes in here will show up in this, but some will. So, there was a big gap between this book and my next one because I felt this really big passion to create this character. So in essence, he kind of was, telling me, hey, write my story. So, and I came up with Ivar Blood and Steel. And I also drew this picture. It's the back. This font is called Bleeding Cowboy. And it was kind of easy to load it into Microsoft Word to actually get that like that. But the story of Ivar is it starts off telling you that he's a prince of a kingdom, and on his birthday his father gets killed in a coup, and he is forced to retreat from the island, and he ends up in the Red Horde lands at the age of 13, and he's forced into a military labor camp. And there he kind of like fights his way up and learns how to fight, kills a couple people, and saves a few. He falls in love with one girl, but she tragically is not in the story anymore. And eventually, at the end of the book, he ends up fighting a witch, because this witch has been remotely part of his story, and he ends up killing her. So I wrote the story of Ivar because I was inspired by this book, because he actually shows up in chapter 12 in this book, and I wanted to expand upon that mysterious character by creating him in here. So that's Ivar. There's a couple of videos on YouTube from other people that have read the book, so you can actually go search that if you want. Then, amidst all of this, there was a lot of info dumping in this book, the first couple renditions. So I kind of cut those chapters out and threw them all into my newest updated book, this one, Mynabardá. If I was to compare it to something else, Mynabardá is kind of like my Silmarillion. So there's a lot of story in here, a lot of background story that tells how the world was created, where the people came from, who created them, and why later on in the histories. There's a deity breakdown in this book. There's also a story that's actually interwoven into this book. And the main character in this book actually comes across one of the main characters in this book. So there's also a part 2 to this one eventually coming down the line. But Mynabardá shows you what happened to the Alpha Clans, what happened to the Alphas and the Vista Alphas, where the elves came from, where the humans came from, the Hermans, the orcs, the orcmen. I talk about dragons. I talk about empires that rose and fell, that were created by certain people, who created them. And the main power in this book, and the entire series of my books, is the Aeolian Empire. It's like a historic anchor to everything that happens within this fantasy realm. The Aeolian Empire, by the time Ivar comes around into the story, it's already dismantled. There's just remnants of princedoms. So you still have like two of the main city-states in my fantasy series is Meldoria and Slada. And Slada is like a Spartan type society, and Meldoria is like an Athens type society. So they're always fighting each other. But when the Aeolian Empire came around, it united them to make cordial. So in this book, I describe how these two families, it started off as families, first started out, and then eventually events happen, wars with the satyrs and the fauns and the minotaurs, and then wars with the orcs. Within all that caused some separation between them. So I talk about the ancestry and all that within this book. So it's a historical book of my fantasy world, if that makes any sense. So that's all of my books that I have here, but the ones that I am working on, there's one story I'm working on right now, which is Arv Monagon, and he's a predecessor to all this, and he's about the same time as the dragon Dorgalax. So there's some animosity between those two. If you guys have seen those, I have a video about talking about Arv Monagon in my previous on my channel. I'm also writing about a character named Carfani, who is a prince who's trying to restore his fallen kingdom, and he's figuring out why he's not able to. There's that story I'm working on. There's a lot of stories I'm working on in between all of this, but that's what I've written so far, and all these books are within the same fantasy realm. I don't plan to write outside of that, because I have enough material to where I can write several book series just out of this little bit that I have, and I do plan to write more. So thank you for watching this video. I hope this video gives you a good explanation or some idea about these books that I've written. All of them are up on Amazon. I will link them below in the description, that way you guys can go look at them if you want. I'll pick them up and read them. Greatly appreciate it. It means a lot to me. But I hope this gives you a better insight into my fantasy realm that I have created. And eventually I want to make a board game out of it. Not your general type of board game, but more like a miniatures battles game. That would be fun. A very good adventure to get into. I already have Ivar sculpted. I did sculpt him myself. I have 2 variations of him, and I probably gotta make more copies of him. And I do have other stuff that I have made part of this fantasy world, that would probably be interesting to some of the readers that come across on books. Yeah. Thank you for watching my video. I know it's kind of a long one today, but I haven't made a video recently, and I figured why not just go through and give them a rundown of each book. That way you get some sort of an idea. Thank you for making it this far. I do appreciate it, and I hope you guys have a wonderful night. And as always, stay being creative.